Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to explore one of the most important essays in the Federalist Papers, Federalist No. 70, written by Alexander Hamilton and published on March 15, 1788. Hamilton wrote this essay under the pseudonym Publius in the New York Packet, and his purpose was clear. He wanted to defend the proposed U.S. Constitution's vision of a single, energetic executive. At the time, critics feared that such an executive looked too much like monarchy. Hamilton responded that not only was a strong executive compatible with Republican government, it was absolutely essential to its success. Hamilton begins with a bold claim. Energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government. In other words, an executive who can act decisively and with vigor is critical if a nation is to survive and flourish. Why? According to Hamilton, an energetic executive is necessary to protect the community from foreign attacks, to ensure the steady administration of the laws, to safeguard property, and to preserve liberty itself against the dangers of ambition, faction, and anarchy. Weak executives, by contrast, invite instability and disorder. Hamilton identifies four key ingredients that create this executive energy. First is unity, having a single leader rather than a committee or council. Second is duration, a term in office long enough to allow for consistent and effective leadership. Third is adequate support, which means proper compensation so the executive can act independently without financial manipulation. And finally, competent powers, the constitutional authority to actually perform the duties of the office. Without these four ingredients, Hamilton argues, the executive cannot function effectively. But Hamilton does not stop there. He knows that in a republic, energy in the executive must be balanced with safety for the people. He identifies two ways to ensure that safety. First, the executive must be dependent on the people, meaning chosen by them or their representatives. Second, the executive must be responsible, meaning the people can clearly identify who is at fault when things go wrong. And here lies one of Hamilton's strongest arguments for unity. If there is only one executive, it's much easier to assign praise or blame. If power is shared among several leaders, responsibility becomes blurred and accountability vanishes. Hamilton strongly criticizes the idea of a plural executive, a system with multiple leaders sharing executive power. History, he says, shows us why this is a bad idea. Plural executives lead to disagreements, delays, and weakened enforcement of the laws. They also open the door to artful cabals, or secretive political factions that undermine unity. Worst of all, when things go wrong, each leader can blame the others, leaving the public unsure of who is responsible. In Hamilton's view, such a system is the opposite of good Republican government. To make his case, Hamilton draws on examples from history. In the Roman Republic, for instance, the government often turned to a single dictator during times of crisis, granting one leader supreme authority to act quickly and decisively. He also relies on the political philosophy of thinkers like Montesquieu and Locke, who emphasized that a single executive is easier for the people to watch, restrain, and hold accountable. Hamilton's argument in Federalist No. 70 has had a lasting impact. It forms the foundation for what is now called the unitary executive theory, which holds that the president must have control over the entire executive branch. Supporters argue that this principle protects the president's ability to act decisively and carry out the laws effectively. Critics warn that it can also lead to an overconcentration of power, undermining the system of checks and balances. This debate is far from over. Modern presidents and courts still wrestle with Hamilton's ideas. In cases like Youngstown Sheet and Tube, Comer v. Sawyer, Clinton v. Jones, and Prince v. United States, the question of how much independent power the president should have remains contested. Hamilton's insistence on energy in the executive still fuels discussions about whether presidential power today has grown too strong or is simply fulfilling the vision of the founders. So as we reflect on Federalist No. 70, let's consider the balance Hamilton was trying to strike. He believed that energy in the executive was essential for the survival of the republic, but that it had to be paired with accountability to the people. He wanted a president who could act with strength and decisiveness, but who could also be held directly responsible for every decision made. Before we finish, let me leave you with a few questions to think about. Does the unitary executive model Hamilton describes fit comfortably within the modern system of checks and balances? Could a plural executive ever work in a democracy, or is it doomed to failure because of the problems Hamilton describes? And finally, is Hamilton's emphasis on a strong executive a safeguard for liberty, or could it become a danger if presidential power grows unchecked? These are the kinds of questions that keep Federalist No. 70 relevant not only for historians, but for all of us as citizens in a constitutional republic.